Don't let her die. That was the first thing I heard before I even understood what had happened, before the pain fully caught up, before I realized I was lying in the arms of a man everyone else feared, and I shouldn't have been anywhere near him in the first place. I didn't belong in places like that. Not in a room where a single watch could cost more than my rent for a year. Not serving people who never looked twice at someone like me. I was just Emily Carter, 24, working double shifts, counting tips in crumpled dollar bills, trying to stay invisible in a world that only noticed power. But that night, invisibility broke. The moment he walked in, everything shifted. I felt it before I saw him. Like the air tightened, like the room itself made space. Adrien Rousseau didn't need an introduction. No one said his name out loud, but everyone knew it. The way conversations softened, the way people avoided eye contact, the way even the manager straightened his tie twice before stepping toward his table. That kind of presence doesn't come from money alone, it comes from weight. I kept my head down, tray balanced in one hand, pretending he was just another customer. But I felt it. His eyes. Not staring. Not obvious, just aware, like he noticed things other people ignored. When I reached his table, my hands were steady, but my pulse wasn't. Still or sparkling? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He didn't answer right away. I thought maybe I'd made a mistake. Maybe I'd spoken too softly. Then he said, still, low, controlled, like every word had already been decided before it left his mouth. I poured the water, careful, precise, the way I always was when I couldn't afford mistakes. But the room felt off. Not him. Not the table. A flicker in the corner of my eye. A man standing too still near the bar, one hand tucked inside his jacket like he didn't belong either. My breath hitched just for a second. Most people wouldn't have noticed. But I did. Maybe because I spent my whole life watching rooms, reading people, knowing when danger was near. I told myself to ignore it, finish the shift, go home, count tips, sleep 4 hours, and do it all again. That was the plan. That was always the plan. But then I looked back at Adrien Rousseau, then I noticed the strange part. He wasn't watching the room. He was watching me. And somehow, that made everything worse. The music kept playing. Glasses clinked. Conversations flowed like nothing was wrong. But the tension under my skin kept building, quiet and sharp like a warning. I didn't know what was about to happen. I didn't know one decision would change everything. I just knew something was coming, and for some reason I couldn't explain. I was already too close to walk away. I told myself to keep moving, to stay in rhythm, to pretend the weight in my chest was just another long shift catching up with me. But my eyes kept drifting back to that man near the bar, the one who stood too still, like he was waiting for something that had not happened yet. And every instinct I had learned from years of watching people whispered the same thing. This is wrong. The room is wrong. I turned away, forcing a smile as I delivered plates to another table, nodding politely, saying all the right things, but my hands felt colder than they should have, and the room, as bright and loud as it was, suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were closing in inch by inch. I should have ignored it. That is what anyone sensible would have done. But I have never been very good at ignoring things. Once I noticed them, I risked another glance, just one, and that was when I saw it more clearly, the tension in his shoulders. The way his gaze flicked not at the crowd, but toward a single point. Toward Adrien Rousseau. My breath caught. Not dramatic, not loud. Just a quiet break in rhythm that almost no one would notice except me, and suddenly everything lined up too fast, too sharp, like pieces of a puzzle I did not want to solve. I looked back at Adrien, and I saw awareness instead of fear, like he already knew the world did not move safely around him. Like danger was not an interruption, but a constant background noise he had learned to live with, and that terrified me more than anything else, because if he was used to it, then this was not new. And if this was not new, then I was standing in the middle of something far bigger than I understood. I took a step back, then another, my tray suddenly feeling heavier in my hand, my heartbeat louder in my ears. Counting seconds, I did not even realize I was counting. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. The man near the bar shifted, just slightly, but enough for me to see the intention forming before the action fully existed, and in that moment, everything slowed down. Not like in movies, not dramatic, not beautiful, just heavy, like time itself was dragging through thick air. I could have walked away, I could have turned, gone into the kitchen, let someone else deal with whatever was about to happen. That would have been the smart choice. That would have been the normal choice. But instead, I found myself moving forward, One step. Then another, drawn by something I could not name. Maybe instinct, maybe old courage buried deeper than logic. Adrian looked up then, directly at me, and for a split second, the entire room disappeared. The music, the voices, the clinking glasses, all of it faded into nothing, and it was just his eyes on mine, sharp, steady. Like he was trying to read a message I had not spoken. I did not know what he saw. I did not know what I was trying to say, but I knew I could not stay silent, not anymore. My grip tightened around the edge of the tray, my pulse racing faster now, louder, drowning out everything else. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out at first, just air, just the realization that whatever I said next would change everything I had ever known. I forced it anyway, forcing my voice past the fear, past the doubt, shaping a warning that felt too big for someone like me to carry. And just as the moment tipped over the edge, just as the room shifted from ordinary to something else entirely, I realized one thing with absolute clarity: I was no longer invisible. I did not think anymore. I just moved, the word finally breaking out of my chest louder than I expected. Get down. It came out raw, sharp, cutting through the music and conversation like it did not belong in that polished room. And for a split second, nothing happened. No one reacted, not the guests, not the staff, not even the man near the bar. But Adrian did. His eyes locked onto mine, and something in my voice must have told him this was not a mistake, because he shifted instantly, fast, controlled, like he had done this before, like reacting to danger was as natural as breathing. And that was when everything snapped into motion. The room did not explode into chaos, not yet. It was quieter than that, heavier, like a breath being held too long. I saw the man near the bar move, his arm coming out of his jacket, just enough to confirm what I already knew, and in that fraction of a second, I made the worst, or maybe the only decision I would ever make. I stepped forward, closing the distance between me and Adrian. My tray slipping from my hand, forgotten as instinct took over. I did not think about consequences. I did not think about who he was or who I was. I just knew that if I did nothing, blood would spill, and I could not stand there and watch it unfold. So I moved faster than I ever had before, my shoulder colliding with his chest as I pushed him back out of the line of danger, the world tilting as momentum carried us both off balance. And then there was a sound, not loud, not dramatic, just a sharp crack that echoed in my bones more than my ears, followed by a sudden heat spreading through me, like my body had forgotten how to stay whole. My breath hitched, my vision flickering at the edges, and for a second I did not understand what had happened, only that something had changed. My body changed in a permanent way. Adrian's hands were on me, then strong, steady, catching me before I could fall completely, his composure gone in a way that did not match the man I had seen minutes ago. Stay with me, he said, low, urgent, not a command, not a threat, something else, almost fear, and that made everything feel unreal, because men like him were not supposed to sound like that. The room finally reacted, voices rising, chairs scraping, footsteps rushing, but it all sounded distant, like I was underwater, my focus narrowing to the way he was holding me, like I mattered, like I was someone fragile he could not afford to lose, and that made no sense. I was nobody. I had always been nobody, but his grip tightened slightly, as if he disagreed, as if in this moment my existence had suddenly become important in a way I did not understand. I tried to speak, to tell him I was fine, that he should not look at me like that, but the words would not come out right. They felt too heavy, too slow, slipping away before they reached my lips. His face was closer, now, his eyes searching mine, not cold, not calculating, but something else entirely, a human flash in a way that felt more dangerous than anything else around us. Who is she? Someone asked nearby, but he did not answer. He did not look away from me, like the rest of the world had stopped existing, and I felt seen, not glanced at or dismissed, but truly seen, and it terrified me more than the moment itself, because I knew deep down nothing good ever came from being noticed by someone like Adrian Russo. My fingers curled weakly against his sleeve, the fabric expensive, smooth under my touch, grounding me in a reality that was slipping further away with each second. And just before everything went dark, I caught one last fragment of his voice, low and absolute. She is with me. And somehow I knew that was larger than this moment. It was a promise I had never agreed to, and one I would not be allowed to break. I came back to sound before I came back to light, a steady rhythm, soft and relentless, like something refusing to let go. I did not know where I was at first, only that everything felt too bright, even through my closed eyes, and too quiet in a way that did not belong to the world I knew. I tried to move, and a dull pressure answered, not sharp, not overwhelming, just enough to remind me my body was not the same as it had been before memory returned in. Fragments of voice, a warning, his hands the way. Everything shifted around him like gravity had changed. I opened my eyes slowly. The ceiling above me was white, too clean, too still, and for a second I thought maybe I had imagined everything, maybe I had just fainted at work from exhaustion like I had once before. But then I saw him. He was standing a few feet away, not pacing, not speaking, just there, his presence filling the space in a way that made the room feel smaller. Adrian Russo did not look like a man who waited for anything, but he was waiting. Now his eyes lifted the moment mine opened, and something in his expression changed, not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would notice, but I felt that the tension easing just slightly, like a breath released after being held too long. "You are awake," he said, his voice low, controlled, but different from before, less distant. I swallowed, my throat dry, trying to find words that made sense, but nothing felt right. "Where am I?" I managed finally, even though I already knew. "You are safe," he replied, not answering the question the way I had asked it, but in a way that felt more deliberate, like safety was the only detail that mattered. I let my gaze drift around the room. Monitors, quiet machines, blinking softly, everything expensive, everything precise, nothing like the places I usually ended up when I was sick or hurt. This was not for people like me. "I should go." The words came out automatically, the instinct to leave, to not take up space, stronger than anything else. I shifted slightly, testing my balance. But his voice stopped me before I could move further. "No." It was not loud, not forceful, but absolute. I froze, looking at him again, trying to understand why he sounded like that, why he was still here at all. "You should not even know who I am." I said, the truth slipping out before I could stop it. "And you should not have done what you did," he replied, stepping closer now, not threatening, just certain, his gaze steady on mine like he was trying to fix something in place. "I just reacted," I said quickly. "Anyone would have." But even as I said it, I knew it was not true. Not everyone would have moved, not everyone would have chosen to step forward instead of away. Something flickered in his eyes, at that something sharp, but not unkind. "No," he said quietly. "Not anyone." The room felt heavier again, the silence stretching between us filled with things I could not name. I looked down at my hands resting against the sheets, trying to anchor myself in anything normal or familiar. "Then it was a mistake," I whispered, because that was easier to accept, easier than believing this moment meant anything more. His response came without hesitation. "It was not." I looked up at him, then really looked at him, and I saw past the reputation and the power to a hard certainty, like he had already decided something about me, without asking, without needing my permission. "You saved my life," he continued, each word measured, deliberate. "That changes things." A chill moved through me, not from fear exactly, but from the weight of what he was saying, because I could feel it too. Something had shifted, something irreversible. I had stepped into a world I did not understand, and now it was looking back at me, refusing to let me leave. "I do not want anything," I said quickly, the words coming out faster now. "I just want to go back to normal." But even as I said it, I knew normal was already gone. His expression did not change, but his voice softened just slightly. "That is no longer an option." The certainty in his tone left no room for argument, and I realized this was deeper than gratitude or one violent moment. And as he stood there watching me like I was no longer invisible, I understood one thing with terrifying clarity. I had not only saved his life, I had become part of it, whether I wanted to or not. I should have stayed quiet. I should have nodded, agreed, taken whatever help he offered, and left before this turned into something I could not steer. But the longer I looked at him, the more I realized this was already out of my hands. "You cannot decide that for me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, even as my fingers curled slightly against the sheet, grounding myself in one real thing that still belonged to me. His gaze did not shift, not even for a second, like he had already considered that argument before I ever spoke it. "It is not a decision," he replied calmly. "It is a consequence." The word landed heavier than I expected, not cruel, not threatening, just certain, like gravity, like something that existed whether I believed in it or not. I shook my head, a small movement, but enough to push back against the pressure building in the room. "I did not ask for any of this," I said, and that part was true. Every piece of this felt like it had happened too fast, too far outside the life I had been trying to hold together just hours ago. "Neither did I," he answered, and something in that response caught me off guard, not because of the words, but because of the tone. There was no anger in it, no frustration, just a quiet acknowledgement that made it harder to argue against him. I looked away, first my eyes drifting toward the window, where the city lights stretched out in the distance, familiar and unreachable at the same time. That was my world out there, late shifts, cheap coffee, counting tips at the end of the night, worrying about rent and bills, things that made sense, things I understood. This did not make sense. Then why are you still here? I asked, the question slipping out softer than I intended, because that was the part one could not reconcile. Men like him did not stay, they did not wait, they did not stand in quiet rooms watching someone like me like I was worth their time. His answer came without hesitation. Because you are. I frowned slightly, the response too simple, too direct. Because I am what? I pressed, forcing him to be specific, forcing this into something I could define. His eyes held mine again, and this time there was no distance left in them, no careful control, just something focused, something deliberate. Because you matter now. The words should not have affected me, they should have sounded ridiculous coming from someone like him, but they did not. They settled somewhere deeper, somewhere uncomfortable, because I could feel the truth behind them, not the kind of truth I wanted, but the kind that did not ask for permission. I let out a slow breath, trying to steady myself. You do not even know me, I said, and that felt like the strongest argument I had left, because how could he decide something like that without knowing anything about who I was, where I came from, what my life looked like outside of this moment? But he did not hesitate. I know enough, he replied, and there it was again, that certainty, that refusal to question what he had already decided. You saw something was wrong before anyone else did. He continued, his voice quieter now, but no less firm. You moved when everyone else froze. I swallowed, the memory flashing too clearly, the way my body had reacted before my mind could catch up, the way the map had shifted because of one decision. That does not mean anything, I said quickly, even though part of me knew it did. Part of me knew it meant everything to someone like him. It means everything, he countered, and this time there was no space left between us, no room to deny it. The silence stretched again, thicker, now heavier, filled with everything neither of us was saying. I looked down at my hands again, at the faint tremor I could not fully control, at the reminder that I was still me, still the same person who had walked into that restaurant expecting nothing more than another shift. I just want my life back, I whispered, because that was the only truth I could hold on to, the only thing that still felt like mine. His response came softer than before, but no less final. That life ended the moment you stepped in front of me. I closed my eyes briefly, letting that sink in, letting the weight of it settle, because deep down I knew he was right, not because he said it, but because I could feel it. Everything had changed, and there was no going back, not to invisibility, not to normal, not to a world where someone like Adrian Russo would not look at me like I was something he intended to keep. And as I opened my eyes again, meeting his gaze, I understood something I had been trying to ignore. This was not about saving him anymore. This was about what came after, and for reasons I could not name, he had already decided I was not walking away from it. The silence did not break, it stretched, pulling tighter with every second until I could feel it in my chest, like pressure building without release. I should have said something else, a sharper answer that would create distance between us, but the truth was I did not know how to create distance from someone who did not recognize it as an option. Adrian did not move away, he did not look distracted or uncertain. He stood there like this moment was exactly where he intended to be, and that unsettled me more than anything else, because I had never been the kind of person anyone planned around. You cannot keep me here, I said finally, the words sharper now, because I needed them to be. I needed to hear myself say them, even if I was not sure they would change anything. His expression did not shift, but something in his posture did, a subtle adjustment, like he was recalibrating, not retreating, just adjusting to my resistance. I am not keeping you here, he said evenly. You are recovering. I let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but without humor. That is not what I mean, and you know it, I replied, and this time I held his gaze, refusing to look away, first refusing to let him control the direction of this conversation completely. Something flickered in his eyes again, not irritation, not anger, something closer to recognition, like he had expected this, like he had been waiting for me to push back. Say what you mean, he said quietly, and there it was, that shift again, not a command, but something close enough that my body reacted anyway, a part of me wanting to comply before I could stop it. I forced myself to stay grounded, to hold on to the part of me that still belonged to my world, not his. I mean, when I walk out of here, this ends, I said, each word deliberate, each one an attempt to draw a line between us. You go back to your life, I go back to mine, and whatever happens stays there. I gestured faintly toward the past, toward the moment that had already changed everything even if I refused to accept it fully. His response came slower this time, not immediate, not automatic, like he was choosing his words more carefully. You believe that is possible? He asked, and it was not mocking, it was not dismissive, it was almost curious, like he genuinely wanted to understand how I could still think that way. It has to be, I answered quickly, because the alternative was an outcome I refused to consider. Not. Yet his gaze softened slightly, not weaker, just less rigid, like something in my answer had shifted the way he saw me. Emily. He said my name for the first time, and hearing it from him felt different, heavier, more real than it should have been. People like me do not get to walk away from moments like that. I felt that settle in before I even responded, because it was not just about him, it was about the world he existed in, a world I had stepped into without understanding the rules. I am not people like you, I said quietly, and that was the truth, the only truth that still felt solid under my feet. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging that point without arguing it. No, you are not, he agreed, and somehow that agreement did not make me feel better. It made things worse, because it meant he was not trying to turn me into something else. He was accepting me as I was, and still deciding I belonged in his world anyway. The realization sent a chill through me, not fear exactly, but something close to it, something deeper. Then let me go, I said, and this time my voice did not waver, not even a little, because this was the line. This was where I either kept my life or lost it completely. The silence that followed felt different from before, heavier, more deliberate, like the room itself was waiting for his answer. Adrian looked at me for a long moment, not searching, not questioning, just seeing, and I felt it again, that weight of his attention, like it was something physical, something I could not step out from under, even if I tried. You will leave this room, he said finally, and for a brief second relief sparked, too fast, too fragile. But you will not leave what this is. The relief disappeared, just as quickly replaced by something colder, something more certain, because I knew then he was not negotiating, he was telling me how my life would unfold from this point forward, and I understood that walking away was not the same as being free. His words did not feel like a threat, they felt worse than that. They felt final, like something already decided long before I ever had a chance to argue against it. And I realized then that this was the difference between his world and mine. I believed in choices, he believed in outcomes. You do not get to decide that for me, I said again, but this time the words sounded weaker even to me, because part of me already understood the truth behind what he was saying. Adrian did not react immediately, he did not interrupt, he simply watched me like he was measuring something, not my defiance, not my fear, but my understanding, like he was waiting for me to catch up to a reality he had accepted long ago. I am not deciding anything, he said finally, his voice quieter now, but somehow heavier. I am telling you what already is. I shook my head, the motion small but stubborn, because if I accepted that, then I accepted everything that came with it, and I was not ready for that, not yet. You do not know my life, I said quickly, grasping for something solid, something that still belonged to me. You do not know what I have to go back to. His gaze did not waver. Then tell me, he said simply, and the directness of it caught me off guard, because no one ever asked that question, not like that, not expecting a real answer. I hesitated, the silence stretching as I debated how much to say, how much to give him, because every detail felt like something he could use to pull me deeper into this situation, but something in his expression told me he already knew more than I was comfortable with. It is not complicated, I said finally, choosing the simplest version of the truth. I work, I pay bills, I stay out of trouble, that is it. It sounded small when I said it out loud, smaller than it felt when I was living it every day, but it was mine, it was the life I had built piece by piece, without anyone's help. Adrian considered that for a moment, his expression unreadable, but not dismissive. And you believe you can return to that? He asked, and there was no judgment in his voice, just a quiet question that made me pause, because the answer was not as easy as it should have been. I thought about the restaurant, about the manager, about the way everyone had looked at me after what happened. I thought about the man near the bar, and the realization that I had seen something I was never supposed to see. Yes, I said anyway, because I needed it to be true. I needed something to remain unchanged. His gaze held mine for a long moment, longer this time, like he was searching for something deeper than my words. You saw his face, he said finally, and the way he said it made my chest tighten, because I knew exactly who he meant. I did not respond right away, the memory too sharp, too immediate even now. That does not mean anything, I said, but the words felt weaker this time, less convincing even to me. It means everything, Adrian replied, and there was no softness in his voice now, no space left for denial. It means you are not invisible anymore. The statement settled heavily between us, and I felt it again, that shift, that irreversible change that had started the moment I chose to step forward instead of away. I looked down at my hands again, trying to steady myself, trying to find something familiar, but everything felt different, even that. I did not ask to be seen. I whispered, and that was the truth, the most honest thing I had said since this began. His response came immediately, not harsh, not unkind, just certain. No one ever does. The room fell quiet again, but this time it was not empty. It was full of something else, something that felt like inevitability, like the path in front of me had already been drawn, whether I chose to follow it or not. I lifted my gaze back to his, meeting his eyes with something that felt like resolve, even if it was fragile, even if it was not enough. Then what happens now? I asked, because if I could not change what had already happened, maybe I could at least understand what came next. Adrian stepped closer, not invading, not forcing, just closing the distance enough that I could feel the weight of his presence again, steady, unwavering. Now, he said quietly, you learn what it means to be part of something you cannot walk away from. And for the first time I understood that this was not a warning, it was an introduction to a life I had never chosen, but was already becoming mine. His words stayed with me long after the room went quiet, not loud, not overwhelming, just there, steady, like something settling into place. No matter what I wanted, the monitor gave one soft beep. Outside the door, a man in a dark coat shifted his weight, pretending to study the vending machine while his eyes tracked every nurse who passed. That small detail did more to explain Adrian's world than any speech could have. I did not respond right away because I did not trust my voice to come out the way I needed it to, not weak, not uncertain. I had spent my whole life staying in control of small things, my time, my money, my space, and now all of that felt like it was slipping through my hands piece by piece. I do not belong in your world, I said finally, and this time I meant it not as resistance, but as fact, something simple, something undeniable. Adrian did not argue, he did not correct me, he simply nodded once, like he agreed with that part at least. No, you do not, he said, and for a second that almost felt like relief, like maybe this could still end here, like maybe he would let me step back into my life without pulling me further into his. But then he continued, but you are already in it. The quiet certainty in his voice erased whatever comfort I had tried to find. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady the rising tension in my chest. Being in the same room does not mean I am part of it. I countered, because I needed that line to exist. I needed something to separate me from everything he represented. His gaze sharpened slightly, not in anger, not in frustration, just focus. You think this is about a room? He asked, and the way he said it made me realize how small my argument sounded compared to what he understood. I hesitated again, because I could feel it now, the gap between us, not just in power or influence, but in perspective. He saw patterns, outcomes, consequences, things I had never needed to consider before. Then what is it about? I asked, because if I was already caught in something, I needed to understand it at least. Adrian took a step closer, not invading, not forcing, just enough to make his presence impossible to ignore. It is about connection, he said simply, and that word landed differently than everything else he had said so far, not sharp, not heavy, but binding in a way I did not expect. You acted when no one else did. That creates a link. I frowned slightly, trying to process that, because it did not feel like a link. It felt like a moment, one decision, one reaction, something that should have ended as quickly as it began. A link does not mean ownership, I replied quickly, because that was where this was heading. I could feel it. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes deepened, like he had reached the part of the conversation he had been moving toward from the beginning. It does not have to, he said, but it does mean responsibility. The words settled in differently, heavier than I expected, because responsibility was something I understood, something I had lived with my entire life, but not like this, not tied to someone like him. I am not responsible for you, I said firmly, because that was the one line I refused to let blur. Adrian held my gaze for a long moment, and for the first time, there was something almost challenging in his expression, not aggressive, not harsh, just testing. No, he agreed, but I am responsible for you now. The statement hit harder than anything else he had said, not because of the words themselves, but because of the certainty behind them, like it was not a decision he was making in this moment, but something he had already accepted. The second I stepped in front of him, I shook my head instinctively. That is not how this works, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew I was speaking from a world that did not apply here. His response was immediate, not dismissive, just final. It is how my world works. The silence that followed felt different from before, not uncertain, not tense, but settled, like something had been decided whether I agreed with it or not. I looked at him, really looked at him, trying to find hesitation, doubt, anything that suggested this could still shift. But there was none. Adrian Russo did not look like a man who made empty statements, and that realization sank deeper than anything else because it meant this was real, all of it, the connection, the responsibility, the shift in my life that I had been trying to deny. Then what happens if I walk away anyway? I asked because I needed to hear the answer, even if I already felt it. His gaze softened just slightly, not in weakness, but in something more controlled, more deliberate. Then I make sure you are safe from a distance, he said, and somehow that answer unsettled me more than anything else because it was not a threat, it was not a warning, it was a promise, one that did not require my agreement, one that did not end just because I wanted it to. And as I sat there realizing that even walking away would not free me, I understood something I had been avoiding from the start. This was not something I could escape. This was something I had already become part of. The moment I chose to act, and now whether I accepted it or not, it was not letting me go. I did not answer him right away because there was nothing left to say that would change what had already been set in motion, and that was the part that unsettled me the most, not his control, not his certainty, but the fact that everything he said felt inevitable, like I had already crossed a line I could not see until it was too late. I looked down again at my hands, the slight tremor still there, quieter now, but not gone, a reminder that something inside me had shifted in a way I could not undo. So what now? I asked finally, because if I could not walk away, then I needed something else, something clear, something defined. Adrian did not hesitate this time, like he had been waiting for that question all along. Now you recover, he said simply, and if it had been anyone else I might have believed that was all he meant, but with him nothing was ever just one thing. And after that? I pressed because I could feel it. There was always an after with him, always a next step already planned before I even knew I was moving forward. He watched me for a moment longer, like he was deciding how much to say, how much to reveal, and that told me more than his words ever could. This was not something simple. This was not something that ended when I left this room. After that, you go back to your life, he said, and for a second I almost believed him, almost let that fragile sense of normal settle back into place. But then he added, with protection. The word hung in the air between us, heavier than it should have been, because it sounded like help, it sounded like something good, but coming from him it felt like something else, something that came with weight, with expectations, with a cost I had not agreed to. I did not ask for protection, I said quickly, the resistance rising again, because I could feel myself being pulled further into something I did not understand. His expression did not change, but his tone shifted just slightly, not softer, just more deliberate. You do not have to ask for it, he replied. You need it. I let out a small breath, shaking my head because I could not accept that, not fully, not yet. I have been fine on my own, I argued, because that was the truth. I had lived carefully, quietly, staying out of situations that did not belong to me until that night, until that one decision. Adrian stepped closer again, not enough to overwhelm, just enough to remind me of the space he occupied. You were fine because you were not seen, he said, and the words landed harder than anything else, because they cut through everything I had been telling myself since this started. I stayed silent, because I could not deny it, not completely, not after what had happened, not after what I had seen, and what had seen me in return. That changed, he continued, his voice steady, unwavering. And people who notice things like that do not forget. I swallowed the implication, settling in deeper now, the realization that this was not only about him or what he wanted, but about what others might do with what I had witnessed. The thought sent a quiet chill through me, not panic, not fear, just awareness, something new, something sharper than before. I lifted my gaze back to his, meeting his eyes again, searching for something I had not seen, yet something that might tell me there was still a way to step back from all of this. But there was nothing there except certainty, and something else, something quieter, something that felt almost like resolve. You are not giving me a choice, I said, and it was not an accusation, it was just the truth spoken out loud. Adrian did not deny it, he did not soften it. He simply met my gaze and said, I am giving you safety. And somehow that felt like the same thing in his world. Maybe it was. I exhaled slowly, the tension in my chest shifting into something else, something closer to acceptance, even if I was not ready to admit it fully. And what do you get out of this? I asked because nothing about him suggested he did anything without reason, without purpose. His answer came without hesitation. Peace of mind, he said, and the simplicity of it caught me off guard because it did not sound like power, it did not sound like control, it sounded personal, and that made it more complicated, not less. I studied him for a moment longer, trying to understand that, trying to see where I fit into that answer, and for the first time I realized something I had not considered before. This was not just about what I had done for him, it was about what that moment had changed for him too, and that realization shifted something inside me quietly, but permanently, because it meant this connection between us was not one-sided. It meant whether I wanted it or not, I had already become part of something that neither of us could ignore, and as the silence settled between us again, I understood one thing almost calmly: this was only the beginning. It should have ended there. That is what I told myself as the room fell quiet again, as the weight of the weight settled into something almost still. I had my answer, he had his decision, and somewhere in between those two things my life had already begun to change. But even knowing that, I could not stop the question forming in my mind, the one that did not belong to fear or resistance, but something else, something more dangerous: curiosity. What does that look like? I asked before I could stop myself, and the moment the words left my mouth, I felt the shift again, subtle but real. Adrian noticed it, of course. He always noticed everything. His gaze sharpened, just slightly, not in suspicion, but in focus, like he understood what that question meant better than I did. It looks like awareness, he said, and his answer was not what I expected. Not control, not restriction, not something that would cage me in, but something quieter, something that sounded almost like a lesson. I frowned slightly, trying to understand how that fit into everything else he had said. Awareness of what? I pressed, because if I was going to be pulled into this, I needed clarity, not vague answers. Adrian moved slowly this time, not closer, not further, just enough to shift the space between us, like he was adjusting the distance to match the conversation. Of who is watching you? He replied simply, and the words settled deeper than I wanted them to, because they confirmed what I had been trying not to think about since that night. I exhaled slowly, my gaze drifting again toward the window, the city lights no longer feeling distant, but different, like they held something beneath the surface I had never noticed before. You mean them? I said quietly, not needing to explain who I meant, because we both understood. Adrian did not answer right away, and that silence was enough to tell me I was right. And you? I added after a second, because if I was being honest, that awareness applied to him just as much as anyone else. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes acknowledged the truth of that. Yes, he said simply, and there was no denial, no attempt to soften it, just honesty in a form I had not expected from him. I let that settle for a moment, letting the reality of it sink in fully, because this was not just about danger, this was about perception, about how the world would see me now, about how it already did. So I just live like that? I asked, the question coming out quieter than I intended, because it felt bigger than it should have, like something that reached further than this room, further than this moment. Adrian studied me again, not measuring, not testing, just observing, like he was trying to understand how I processed this, how I adapted to something that had always been normal for him. You learn to see what you did not see before, he said, and the way he said it made it sound less like a burden and more like a shift in perspective, like he was not giving me something new, but revealing something that had always been there. I shook my head slightly, not in denial, but in disbelief, because that kind of awareness came with a cost. I could already feel it. That is not living, I said softly, because to me living had always meant something simpler, something quieter, something that did not require constant attention to everything around me. Adrian did not argue. He did not dismiss what I said. He simply held my gaze and replied, "It is a different kind of living." And somehow that answer stayed with me longer than anything else, because it was not forcing me to accept his world. It was asking me to understand it, to see it the way he did, even if I never fully belonged in it. The silence that followed felt different from before, not heavy, not tense, but thoughtful, like something had shifted again, not in control, not in power, but in perspective. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I saw something I had not noticed before, not just certainty and not just control, but something else, something that felt almost like patience, like he was not trying to rush this, not trying to force me into something I could not yet understand, but simply waiting for me to reach it on my own terms. And that realization changed something quietly but undeniably, because it meant this was not just about being pulled into his world, it was about being guided through it in a way I had not expected. And as I sat there processing everything he had said, everything that had already changed, I understood one thing. In a different way, this was not only happening to me. I was beginning to step into it whether I was ready or not. The room felt different after that, not quieter, not calmer, just changed like an invisible lock had slid into place and would not move again. I could still feel his presence even when I looked away, like it stayed in the air around me, steady, constant, impossible to ignore. And for the first time, I realized it was not only him. It was everything that came with him, everything I had stepped into without understanding how deep it went. When do I leave? I asked, because staying here any longer felt like standing in the middle of something I could not define, something that was already pulling me in too far. Adrian did not answer immediately. He glanced briefly toward the door, like he was considering something beyond this room, beyond me, before his attention returned. Soon, he said, and the word should have felt like relief, but it did not. Not entirely, because I knew leaving did not mean escaping anymore. It just meant the next part was about to begin. I nodded slightly, absorbing that, trying to prepare for something I could not see yet. And then what? I asked again, because the unknown felt heavier than anything else right now, heavier than fear, heavier than everything that had already happened. His gaze held mine for a moment longer, and then he said something that shifted everything again. Then you go home. The simplicity of it caught me off guard, because it sounded normal. It sounded like something that belonged to my world, not his. But the way he said it told me it was not that simple. Nothing with him ever was. With someone outside. He added, and there it was, the reminder that normal was no longer just mine. It came with him now, no matter what I wanted. The words should have scared me, because they did, but they also gave the order of things a shape. A nurse came in after that with a folder pressed to her chest, and a look that kept sliding toward Adrian before it reached me. She told me the bullet had passed through the soft place above my ribs. No organ damage. No miracle either. Blood loss, shock, stitches, observation, antibiotics, rest. The practical words should have made it smaller, but they did not. They only proved that I had come close enough to the edge to understand where it was. When she left, I stared at the bandage beneath the hospital gown and tried to match that clean white square to the crack in the restaurant, to the heat in my side, to Adrian's voice telling someone not to let me die. It still felt like two different lives accidentally touching. Then my phone buzzed on the table beside the bed. 3 missed calls from the restaurant. 1 message from my landlord about rent. 1 from a coworker asking if I was alive or if the police had taken my statement yet. Those ordinary problems should have pulled me back to myself, but even they looked different now, like someone had moved them under brighter light. I thought about my apartment, the loose chain on the door, the narrow hallway, the window that never locked properly unless I pushed it twice. I thought about going there alone with a bandage under my shirt, and my name suddenly attached to Adrian Russo's in the whispers of people who loved danger as long as it happened to someone else. The old version of me would have called that fear and hated myself for it. The new version of me, the one I did not know how to name yet, recognized it as information. Adrian noticed the phone in my hand, but he did not reach for it. He only said, "Answer who you choose. Ignore who you choose. But do not pretend the choice is the same as it was yesterday." For once, I had no quick reply. That was the first honest thing he had given me that did not feel like a chain. It felt like a warning with room inside it. And that room mattered more than I wanted to admit. By the time the nurse returned with discharge papers, the hospital windows had turned dark enough to reflect both of us. She explained the pain medication, the follow-up appointment, the warning signs that meant I had to come back immediately. Adrian listened to every word as if he were memorizing a contract. I listened too, but part of me kept hearing the restaurant behind it, the crash of the tray, the people shouting, the way my life had narrowed to one impossible second. Leaving suddenly sounded less like freedom and more like proof that I had survived long enough to face the cost. I do not need someone watching me, I said quickly, the resistance automatic, because the idea of being followed, of being observed, even for safety, felt like losing the last piece of independence I still had. Adrian did not argue. He did not push back immediately. He simply looked at me like he was waiting for me to finish the thought, to understand it fully before he responded. "You need someone making sure nothing changes around you without you noticing," he said finally, and the way he phrased it made it sound less like surveillance and more like awareness, like he was not taking something from me, but adding something I had never needed before. I hesitated again, because I could feel it now, the shift in my thinking, the way I was starting to consider things I would have dismissed just hours ago, the way his perspective was beginning to influence mine in ways I did not expect. That is not the same thing, I said, but my voice lacked the certainty it had before, because part of me was already starting to see what he meant. Adrian inclined his head slightly, acknowledging that without pressing it further, and that restraint unsettled me more than if he had argued, because it meant he did not need to convince me. He knew I would reach the conclusion on my own eventually. You will not be alone in this, he said, and the statement carried something different now, not control, not command, something closer to assurance, like he was offering stability in a situation that no longer had any for me. I looked at him again, trying to understand that, trying to figure out where that line existed between help and control, between protection and possession. But the line was not clear, not in his world. Maybe it never had been. I have always been alone in it, I said quietly, because that was the truth. I had built my life on independence, on not needing anyone, on staying out of situations that required more than I could give. Adrian's expression shifted slightly at that, not in disagreement, but in recognition, like he understood that part of me better than I expected. Not anymore, he replied, and the certainty in his voice did not feel forced. It felt settled, like something already decided, not just by him, but by the situation itself. I exhaled slowly, letting that settle, because I could not argue against it, not fully, not after everything that had happened, not after everything that had changed. I glanced toward the door, then back at him, the realization finally forming clearly in my mind. Leaving this room was not the end, it was just the transition, the point where everything moved from something contained into something real, something that would follow me back into my life, into my space, into everything I had thought was separate from this world. And you, I said quietly, my gaze meeting his again. Do you just disappear after this? Because that was the one question I had not asked yet, the one part one had avoided considering. Adrian held my gaze without hesitation, and this time his answer came without distance, without restraint. No, he said simply, and there was no explanation needed, no elaboration, because I understood it immediately. He was not stepping out of this, he was part of it just as much as I was now. And as the weight of that settled into a steady fact, I realized one thing beyond doubt: leaving this room did not mean leaving him. It meant stepping into a reality where he would always be there, whether I saw him or not. And that was something I was only just beginning to understand. The moment I stood up, everything felt different, not only physically, not only the careful way my body reminded me to move slower, to pay attention, but deeper than that, like I was stepping out of one version of my life and into something I could not fully see. Yet the floor felt steady beneath my feet, but nothing else did. Adrian watched me, without saying anything at first, his attention sharp, but not overwhelming, like he was making sure I would not fall, without making it obvious that he was ready to catch me if I did. I can walk, I said quietly, before he could offer anything, before he could take another step closer, because I needed that to remain mine, at least this small part of independence. He inclined his head slightly, accepting that without question, and that simple acknowledgement did something unexpected. It made me trust him just a little more than I should have. The room felt smaller as I moved toward the door, each step carrying weight, not just from what had happened, but from what was waiting on the other side. I paused with my hand on the handle, not because I was unsure, but because I knew once I opened it, there was no returning to what this had been before: contained, controlled, distant. You do not have to walk out alone, Adrian said behind me, his voice steady, and that word alone settled differently now than it would have hours ago. I turned slightly, just enough to look at him over my shoulder. You already said I would not be, I replied, and there was no accusation in my tone, just acknowledgement of something we both understood. His gaze held mine for a second longer, and then he stepped forward, not too close, not too far, just enough that I could feel the shift in the space between us. That does not mean you lose yourself in the process, he said, and the words caught me off guard, because I had not expected that from him. Not clarity like that, not something that sounded almost like reassurance. I studied him for a moment longer, trying to understand where that came from, because it did not fit the version of him I had built in my mind. You keep saying things that make this sound like a choice, I said quietly. But it is not. He did not deny it, he did not pretend otherwise, he simply nodded once. It is not a choice to be seen, he said, but it is a choice what you do with it. The statement lingered between us, and a thin piece of control returned. Not fear and not resistance, like maybe there was still a part of this I could define, even if everything else was already decided. I opened the door, then the hallway beyond, brighter, louder, more real than the quiet space we had been in. Voices moved in the distance, footsteps echoed, life continuing outside of everything that had changed inside that room. And for a second, I just stood there, taking it and letting the contrast settle. Adrian stepped beside me, not touching, not crowding, just present like he always was. Now, this is where it becomes real, he said, and I knew he did not mean the hallway or the building or even the city. He meant everything beyond this moment, everything that would follow, everything I would have to face once I walked forward. I nodded slowly, not because I was ready, but because I understood that readiness did not matter anymore. Then I guess there is no point standing here, I said, more to myself than to him. And with that, I took the first step out into the hallway. The air felt different, the sounds sharper, the awareness he had talked about settling in almost immediately, like a new sense I had not known I was capable of. I noticed things I would have ignored before, the way people glanced briefly, then looked away, the subtle shifts in movement, the feeling of being observed, even when I could not pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. I slowed slightly, not stopping, just adjusting, and Adrian noticed. Of course, he noticed everything. You feel it, he said quietly, not asking, just stating, and I did not deny it. Yeah, I admitted, because there was no point pretending anymore. The world had changed, and I could feel it in every step I took. We walked together, then not side by side exactly, but close enough that I was aware of him, without needing to look, close enough that I understood what he had meant when he said I would not be alone. The exit came into view, the final line between what had been and what was about to begin, and as I reached for the door again, I realized something that should have terrified me but did not. Not completely. I was not just stepping back into my life, I was stepping into something else, something that had already started to shape itself around me. And as the door opened and the city lights stretched out in front of us, I understood one thing with quiet certainty: there was no going back, only forward into whatever this had become. The night air hit differently when I stepped outside, cooler, sharper, like it carried a new warning in it. The city stretched out in front of me, just like it always had, lights flickering, traffic moving, people passing by, unaware that anything had changed. But for me, the map had shifted. I stood there for a second longer than I should have, letting it settle, letting the weight of everything catch up to me. Adrian stepped out behind me, not close enough to touch, not far enough to disappear, just there, like he had said he would be, like he always would be. Now, I took a slow breath, trying to steady myself, trying to find a familiar edge in a suddenly unfamiliar world. This is where you leave, I said quietly without turning around, because I needed to hear it. I needed to believe there was still a line between his world and mine. His answer came after a pause, not long, not uncertain, just enough to remind me. He chose his words carefully. This is where you go forward, he said, and I closed my eyes for a second, because that was not what I had asked, not what I had hoped to hear, but it felt more true than anything else he could have said. I turned then, finally facing him fully under the glow of the streetlights, seeing him not as the man in the quiet room, not as the presence that filled every space, but as something real, something that existed in my world now, whether I accepted it or not. You keep saying things like that, I said, my voice softer now, not defensive, not resisting, just tired in a way I could not fully explain. Like this is not something I can step away from. His gaze met mine, steady, unwavering, and for the first time, there was something in it I had not seen before, not control, not certainty, quiet truth, without force. Because it is not, he replied, and there was no weight behind it, no pressure, no expectation, just a simple statement that settled into place no matter what I wanted. I looked around then at the street, the people, the passing cars, the life that had always been mine, and tried to see it the way I had before, but I could not completely. The awareness was there now, the subtle shifts, the glances, the things I would have ignored just hours ago, and I understood what he meant. This was not about him standing beside me. This was about everything I had stepped into, everything that had already begun to change. Then what am I supposed to do? I asked quietly, because that was the question that mattered now, not how to leave, not how to escape, but how to exist in this new reality. Adrian did not answer right away. He watched me for a moment longer, like he was giving me the space to reach that question on my own before he responded. You live, he said simply, and the word felt different now, heavier but clearer. You go back to your life, you keep moving forward, you do not let this define you. I let out a slow breath, because that sounded easy, it sounded like a clear instruction I could hold on to. And you? I asked again, because I needed to understand where he fit into that, where he stayed in all of this. His answer came without hesitation. I make sure you get the chance to do that. And there it was again, that promise, not loud, not overwhelming, just steady, like something that would not break no matter what. I nodded slowly, not because I fully accepted it, but because I understood it, because part of me already knew it was true whether I liked it or not. I took a step back, then creating a small distance between us, not as rejection, not as defiance, just as a reminder that I was still me, still someone separate from him, even if that line was no longer as clear as it had been before. "Good night, Adrian," I said finally, the words simple but carrying more weight than they should have, because they felt like the first step in a new beginning. He held my gaze for a moment longer and then nodded once. "Good night, Emily," he replied, and for a